would you say there is a particular food group or any foods that you really believe pregnant women should include in their diets?
Absolutely. So eggs with the yolks are really high up on my list. I mentioned them as being a potential salmonella risk. That can be mitigated by cooking them until the yolk is more firm. However, even if you don't cook your eggs until the yolk is totally firm, the risk of you getting salmonella from them, which is the main concern here, is very, very low, very unlikely. And egg yolks in particular are highly, highly nutrient dense. They're the #1 food source of choline in the diet, which is vital for baby's brain development, really vital for healthy placental function for mom as well. And they're also really high in other nutrients that might be lower in the diet, especially if somebody is not eating a lot of animal foods. So nutrients like DHA, which you also find in seafood, vitamin B12, selenium, iodine, a number of B vitamins you're also getting in eggs.
Brilliant. And so the other question I have is, like, what food is best for keeping energy levels high in that first trimester, particularly if you're struggling with fatigue, but also latterly in pregnancy when you start to feel more physically exhausted? Are there any particular foods that you would say are very good for giving energy?
So first trimester is a little bit of a wild card because you so often have nausea and food aversions, and usually those kind of coexist. It really depends, person to person, what foods are going to be difficult for them to get in or not. Most commonly from what I see, it's usually protein foods, animal foods, especially things that have a strong odor. So you might have to get creative on your protein options in the first trimester until the nausea subsides. But when we're thinking about what gives us sort of the long-term energy, not the little burst of energy and then the crash, it usually is foods that are a source of protein and fat. They don't spike our blood sugar, they stabilize it, and so they give us that sort of long-term steady energy, whereas carbs give us a quick burst and then we tend to crash out unless we're consuming them along with a decent amount of protein and fat as well. So once the nausea and aversions have cleared up, because I'm never going to force feed somebody to eat something that their body is just saying absolutely not, then in the latter part of pregnancy, you are usually looking at protein and fat-rich foods providing us the most boost in the energy levels, and they also tend to be the ones that have some of the nutrients that are really vital for maintaining energy, like vitamin B12 and iron. If you start to go anemic, you can really start to feel low energy. And so we want to be getting enough of these iron-rich animal foods like red meat, fish, shellfish, cooked, and dark meat, chicken and poultry to help keep our iron levels up and keep our energy up.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because I think when you think of energy, a lot of people would automatically go towards kind of carbohydrate sources like a banana or something. But actually, I remember after I'd had my gestational diabetes diagnosis, I can't tell you the amount of nuts I was eating. They became such a go-to snack for me. But I guess that was one of my learnings from reading your book. So now I really want to zoom out a bit and look at how nutrition really impacts the baby. Maybe that's more of a zoom in. So one of the questions we have is, can a mother's diet actually shape a baby's taste preference? So for instance, if you avoid sugar, would that impact the baby's kind of development of taste for a sweet tooth? Or for instance, if you ate loads of greens and broccoli, does that mean your baby is going to grow up to love greens?
So there is actually some research specific to taste preferences that are formed in utero. There's also some degree of those taste preferences are going to be formed after the fact as well, once they start eating solid foods. But it does turn out that the amniotic fluid changes flavor a little bit. And so the baby can taste that, and there does seem to be a propensity towards more of the foods that the mom was eating. With the sugar specifically, that's a little bit of a different angle. Yes, maybe the amniotic fluid may taste a little sweeter, but also maternal blood sugar affects the fetus's blood sugar. And so that can actually program not through a taste preference, but through how the pancreas functions and how insulin is released. That can actually sort of shift their metabolism to be bit more insulin resistant and a bit more prone to type 2 diabetes later on in their life if blood sugar levels are fairly consistently high throughout the pregnancy. An occasional, like you had a treat at your baby shower or you have a small piece of chocolate after dinner or something, no big deal. But if we're seeing pretty consistently elevated blood sugar day after day after day, month after month throughout the pregnancy, they do find that child's blood sugar metabolism is changed later on. They call it fetal programming. So that's a bit different than a taste preference, although it could affect it from both angles.
Okay, thank you for that. And in terms of the baby as well, would you say what the mother eats affects the baby's size, or is that primarily down to genetics?
It's a little bit of both. So we do see that babies from parents who are taller or maybe have like higher muscle mass, they tend to grow a little bit larger in utero, regardless of what a mom is eating or anything like that. But there are independent risk factors identified for birth size. So eating, and some of the data is specific to, is the baby a healthy enough size? And then some of the data is like, I guess you could call it fetal overgrowth. Like when is the baby growing like much, much larger than expected? So we know, for example, just getting adequate nourishment as a whole is going to affect baby's size. If you're significantly undernourished and you're not gaining enough weight, you're more likely to have a baby that's very small. If you're getting enough calories and especially enough protein, they're more likely to be an average and healthy size and healthy amount of lean body mass. If the mother is gaining a lot more weight than is expected by things like the Institute of Medicine guidelines, and also another factor would be maternal blood sugar being consistently high. Those two factors, high weight gain, high maternal blood sugar, tend to favor a baby that's much larger and they have a higher percent body fat at birth than babies from moms who maybe didn't gain quite as much weight or also did not have high blood sugar. So it kind of depends. You will also, just as I mentioned, you have situations where it's genetically, everything seems to be, picture perfect health-wise with mom and dad, and for whatever reason she has 9 and 10 pound babies. You can have healthy bigger babies as well. So that's where it gets a little bit tricky sometimes to tease out, because we don't always know exactly why babies come out a certain size. We know, okay, there's this risk factor here, there's a risk factor here. How much that'll play into it is not always clear. You really don't know how big baby's going to be until they're born,
Yeah, of course. And is it true that babies tend to get bigger the more babies that you have? So for instance, my first baby was 9 pounds, which is on the larger side of life. So is it like hard science that my second baby will be bigger than that?
Not necessarily. I've seen it all over the map, especially because I've done so much work with women with gestational diabetes. I'm not saying this is you, but there are some cases where a gestational diabetes diagnosis really is kind of like it triggers like a dietary lifestyle overhaul. So they come into the next pregnancy with really healthy eating habits and they have a healthier, easier pregnancy. Sometimes they don't even get gestational diabetes in a subsequent pregnancy, and they'll find their babies are smaller. So you just never know. It is, having a previous larger baby is a risk factor for having a larger baby in the future. But it's also possible, in your case, if your gestational diabetes was really well controlled, it could just be that your body grows 9-pound babies and it had nothing to do with blood sugar. And not all 9-pound babies have metabolic health issues. I was actually a 9-pound baby myself and my metabolic health has been fine. So, it's not always like as black and white as I think some clinicians would like to make it sound.